Hey everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to be sharing some 5-star book predictions. I actually made a video like this last year where I talked about some books that I had a really good feeling about and that I thought could be 5 stars. Then a couple of months ago I reacted to that video to see whether I was right, and if you haven't seen either of those videos I will leave them linked in the description, but I thought it was about time that I made a new video with a new list of books that I think I'm really going to love. There are 10 books on this list and a few different genres, so I have a few fantasies, a couple of romance, and then a few that are miscellaneous. I think I have a thriller on this list and then a historical fiction. I can't actually remember, but I guess we will find out as I go. So I'm going to get right in, starting with the fantasy books. And the first book on my list is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I believe that this is set in a world that is split into East and West, and there's this prophecy that this evil dragon who was banished like 1,000 years ago is about to come back, and I think that the East and West have to work together to stop it from happening. I'm not really sure. I heard a lot about this book I think last year, and then I haven't heard as much recently, but I did recently read The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon and I really enjoyed it. It was Samantha Shannon's first book that she ever published and it came out in 2013, so it had a few tropes that I wasn't a massive fan of, but I have high hopes for The Priory of the Orange Tree. I've also heard that this has really good LGBTQ plus rep. I'm pretty sure that it's sapphic and it has a female-female relationship. It is quite a chunky book. I think it's over 800 pages, but it's also a standalone, so that's less commitment, which is always good with me. The next book on my list is The Name of the Wind by Rothfuss, and this I believe is about a wizard called Kavoth who is really famous in this world, and it's essentially him telling the story of his life. I think there's a magic school setting, that's what I've heard. And you know how sometimes you'll see lists which have the best fantasy books of all time? This book always seems to be on that list, and so I would like to read it at some point to see what I think of it. I've heard it's quite slow paced and that it's also very character driven, which sounds like my kind of fantasy, and so even though this does intimidate me quite a lot, especially because it is quite chunky, I have a feeling that I am going to like it because I do tend to enjoy the popular books and books that are really hyped. The next book on my list is We Hunt the Flame by Hafsah Faizal, and I believe that this is YA fantasy, so the other two books that I mentioned were adult fantasy. I'm pretty sure that this is young adult, and I believe that it follows two characters. So Zafira, who is a hunter, and she disguises herself as a man to hunt to be able to feed her village, and then it also follows Nasir, who is the son of the Sultan, and I believe that the Sultan is quite a cruel ruler, and they both end up being sent on this very similar quest, and I'm assuming that they run into each other and that it's an enemies to lovers type situation. That's what I've heard anyway. I've heard a lot of people recently raving about this book and talking about how great the world building is, and so that definitely has me intrigued, especially because the people that I've heard talking about this book are people who I know have quite a similar taste in YA fantasy to me, so I'm definitely intrigued and I would like to get around to this soon. It was sort of on my August TBR, but it was one of those where I was going to read it if I got round to it, and so yeah, I am hoping to read it soon. I mean, I need to read it soon because, as you might be able to tell, it's a library copy and it's due back in a few weeks, so yeah, definitely one that I'm hoping to get around to very soon. Next on my list is Vicious by Schwab, and I think the main reason that this book is on my list is because I've read a couple of Schwab's books. I've read A Dark Shade of Magic and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I gave both of them 4 stars. I really like Schwab's writing style, but I think of all of her books that I've heard of, the plot for Vicious is the one that appeals to me the most because it's set in this world where there are people who have magical abilities, and it follows 2 friends, Victor and Eli, who are roommates in college, and they start doing these experiments to find out how to get these magical abilities, and I think they work out how. I think that the way that you get magical abilities is by having a near-death experience, and so do they kill each other and then bring each other back to life to get these superpowers? I'm not really sure, but I know that the plot picks up 10 years later where Victor has just broken out of prison and him and Eli are no longer friends and they're actually mortal enemies. I've heard that the characters in this story are very morally grey, and it's one of those situations where you're not really sure who you're meant to be rooting for, and so that is something that really appeals to me, and I'm definitely intrigued. The next book on my list is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. So this is about a guy called Linus who works for the government in the department that oversees magical children, and he's sent to investigate this orphanage that supposedly houses these really dangerous children, and he's meant to look into whether they're too dangerous and whether they could bring about the end of the world. However, when he arrives, he finds out that these children actually aren't dangerous at all, and apparently it's a really wholesome story and it's really cute, and it's all about found family, which is one of my favourite tropes, and everyone has told me that I'm going to love this book, and I trust them. Okay, so that was the last of the fantasy books. I'm now going to move on to books that aren't fantasy, starting with romance, and the first book that I want to talk about is The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang. This is the third book in the Kiss Quotient series, which is a series that I've really enjoyed. It's a very steamy adult romance series, and each of the books can be read as standalones, but some of the characters overlap, if that makes sense. I actually have an arc of this book through NetGalley, and so it is one that I'm hoping to get around to soon. I think it comes out at the end of August or the start of September, around that time. But yeah, the first two books in this series both had autism representation, and I'm pretty sure that this one does too. I believe that it follows a woman called Anna, who is a YouTuber, like a content creator, and at the start of the book her boyfriend turns around to her and says that he wants an open relationship, and she's not really okay with it, but she decides that if that's what he wants, then she's going to do it too. And so she goes out to try and have a string of one-night stands, and that's when she meets Quan, who is a side character from the first two books, and he was actually one of my favourite characters from the first two books in this series, so I'm really excited to see his story. I believe that they try and have this casual relationship but end up developing real feelings for each other. As I mentioned, this book technically hasn't actually been released yet, so I haven't seen many reviews, or any reviews actually. However, because I really loved the first two books, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to love this one too, because I know that I do like Helen Hoang's writing. The second romance book on my list is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. So this is a new adult romance that follows a woman called August who has recently moved to New York City, and she has a crush on this woman that she sees every morning on the train. I think her name is Jane, but then she finds out that Jane is actually from the 1970s and she's been displaced in time and she's stuck on this train. I have heard mixed reviews about this book, but I also heard the same about Casey McQuiston's other book, Red, White and Royal Blue, and I ended up really enjoying that book, and so I do still have high hopes for One Last Stop. I've also heard that the book does a really good job of showing what it was like to be LGBTQ+ in the 70s versus the present day, because obviously the main characters, Jane and August, are from completely different decades, and so that also sounds really interesting. The next book on my list is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. So I have read two of Fredrik Backman's books. I read Beartown last year and I read A Man Called Uwe earlier this year, and I gave them both 5 stars. I really like Fredrik Backman's writing style. He's actually a Swedish author, and so his books have been translated into English. I have heard mixed things about Anxious People in comparison to Fredrik Backman's other books, but I would still like to give it a go. I've heard that it is very thought-provoking, which is what I liked about the other two Backman books that I read. I believe that this is about a bank robbery that goes wrong, and the person robbing the bank ends up taking a load of people hostage, and yeah, it's a very character-driven story about the people in this situation and how they came to be there. The next book on my list is the final revival of Opal and Ned. So this is historical fiction or literary fiction. I believe that there's 2 timelines, so one set in the past in the 1970s and one that's set more in the present day, and it follows an aspiring musician who is discovered by a singer-songwriter and they start recording music together, and I believe that they become quite famous. The main reason that this book is on this list is because I've heard it compared to Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid in the way that it's told in an interview style format, and that is something that I did really like when I read Daisy Jones last year, and so I'm definitely intrigued by this. It came out earlier this year and I did actually get get an arc of it through NetGalley, but I never got around to reading it because I'm useless at reading arcs on time. And so yeah, it is one that I am really hoping to get to soon, and definitely by the end of the year. The final book on my list is 3 Hours by Rosamund Lupton, and this is a thriller. And thrillers are the one genre where I really struggle to predict whether I'm going to give them 5 stars. And so what I tend to look out for are thrillers that have a plot that sounds different to anything that I've read before, because that is something that I tend to look out for in thrillers, is that I want something that feels unique. I believe that this is about a school shooting, and the reason that it's called 3 Hours is because the events of the book take place over 3 hours. And so that is something that really intrigues me. I've tried not to look too much into the plot of this book because I feel like it's one of those stories where I want to go in not knowing too much. However, I've heard that it has a lot of tension and a lot of suspense, and those are both things that I do like in thrillers. I've seen quite a few people say that this is one of their favourite thrillers that they've read so far this year, and so I'm really hoping that I will love it too. Okay, so those are my 10 5-star predictions for the next year, I want to say. I think last time it took me about 9-ish months to read all of the books on my list, but my TBR at the moment is out of control, and so who knows when I'm actually going to get around to all of these books. But yeah, please let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you ended up rating them. Let me know what you thought of them, and also don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and click subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Bye.